When I say the word hell, what pops into your brain? Eternal flames, being separated from God for all time? Or do you believe hell is a place made up to control the masses? If you've been watching this series on the history of hell in the Christian faith, this is the episode you've been waiting for. Today we're discussing a word that struck absolute fear into the heart of many intertestamental Jews and many early Christians. Gehenna. And remember, this series on hell is not meant to prove or disprove the existence of hell, nor is this a turn or burn sermon. This is about the history of hell in the Christian faith, using facts and history to deepen our understanding of just what exactly it was that the writers of the Bible were referring to. And this episode might just set you on fire. Ooh, terrible analogy. But this episode is going to upset the apple cart for a lot of folks. So check your cognitive dissonance and get ready, because the history on this one is going deep. When it comes to hell, which remember is translated from 4 different words in the Bible, Gehenna stands unique. Gehenna is the one term used to depict the ultimate destiny of the wicked. And Jesus is the one who primarily uses this term in the Gospels. And it also makes one appearance in the book of James. But yet, intriguingly, in all of Paul's writings, Gehenna is noticeably absent. And today, you'll find out why. So, what's Gehenna? Gehenna is a Greek transliteration of the Hebrew ge-hinnom. In the Old Testament, it's a place name of a specific valley southwest of Jerusalem. 2 Kings 23 refers to it as the Valley of the Sons of Hinnom, of the Son of Hinnom in Jeremiah 19, or of Hinnom in Nehemiah 11:30. And you can even tour it today, but there's no crazy fires or anything. It's a rather lovely place. And geographically, it's used 13 times in the Hebrew Bible, in Joshua 15 and 18 as a geographical place, in 2 Kings 23, 2 Chronicles 28 and 33, and Jeremiah 32 is reference to historical events that happened there. And pay attention, it's mentioned 5 times in Jeremiah in prophecies where God will punish those who have abandoned the Israelite faith, primarily in Jeremiah 7 and 19. And it's the valley referred to in Jeremiah 31 and Isaiah 66. Now, in the Old Testament, why is this valley mentioned so much? Because Gehenna had a rather dark, ugly history. In 2 Chronicles 28, we see the Judaic king Ahaz establish pagan sacrifices in the valley of Gehenna, where children were passed through the fire, with Jewish tradition saying that they were burned alive. And 2 Kings 16:3 says Ahaz even sacrificed his own sons there. And 2 generations later, King Manasseh did the same in 2 Kings 21. 2 generations after that, King Josiah arrives on the scene and initiates vast reforms in 2 Kings 23 to purify the land and centralize worship in Jerusalem. And one of his targets was the Valley of Gehenna, which had come to be known as the Place of Fire. And part of Josiah's reforms, he's recorded as scattering human bones at pagan sites to defile them, rendering an already unclean place even more unclean. And 2 Chronicles records Josiah as burning the bones of dead pagan priests on their altars, cleansing Judah and Jerusalem from their sin. But the memory of what happened in the Valley of Gehenna didn't just vanish, and later prophets like Jeremiah and Isaiah made loads of visual callbacks to this valley because it was powerful imagery for a people who loved visual imagery. And this is important. Gehenna is strongly alluded to in Isaiah 66, which, if you know your links between the Old Testament and the New Testament, you know Isaiah 66 was a favorite of Jesus in his teachings. And Isaiah 66 depicts a future battle outside Jerusalem where God protects the righteous inside the city while destroying the wicked with fire and sword, with the righteous observing the dead bodies in the valley where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. This imagery is undeniably connected to Jeremiah portraying a terrible battle where the dead are left unburied and consumed by scavengers. And this theme is further linked to the Valley of Slaughter in Jeremiah as expressed in Isaiah 30, where it refers to the great day of slaughter associated with Israel's salvation and the defeat of her enemies on the day of the Lord. Whew! Now, you might be saying, what does any of that have to do with hell? I'm glad you asked. In Hebraic consciousness, Gehenna was the place of fire, death, and utter annihilation. It was cursed. And much later writings even said that it became a heaping garbage dump for Jerusalem, where everything from trash to the cadavers of criminals were tossed and burned 24/7. And come closer. This might upset you, but let me use this chance to address a well-known myth that's shared as truth even in a number of study Bibles, that Gehenna became a garbage dump outside of the city of Jerusalem where refuse, trash, and even dead bodies were thrown into and buried. That's a myth. Because, number one, there's absolutely no archaeological evidence of Gehenna being used as a garbage dump. Number two, there are no ancient attestations of Gehenna being a garbage dump. And number three, the earliest mention anyone can find of Gehenna being a burning garbage dump comes from a Jewish rabbi around 1200 AD named David Kimchi in his commentary to Psalm 27. That's right. The earliest reference to Gehenna as a garbage dump came 1,200 years after Jesus. But Gehinnom, aka Gehenna, was full of powerful imagery for ancient Jews. And during the intertestamental period and the rise of apocalyptic literature that became popular at that time, and as the Hebraic views of the afterlife took on greater depth that we've discussed in this series, Gehinnom was a cursed place of child sacrifice and prophetic judgment and battles and death. But in many Jewish sects, Gehenna evolved to represent a place of continued torment after death. And that idea of continued or eternal torment continued to deepen well after Christ, as demonstrated in pseudepigraphal writings such as the Apocalypse of Abraham and Tu Baruch, and even centuries later in the Mishnah and Talmud, particularly in the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. So, historically, and just like the other three words translated as hell, Sheol, Hades, and Tartarus, there's a shift in the understanding of what Gehenna actually was. It began as a geographical place with a dark history that soon came to represent something even more powerful through Jeremiah, Isaiah, and later apocalyptic writers. And this makes total sense when you understand that the Bible is a multivocal work spanning books that were written over a 1,000-year period. And again, this is not saying that there's no hell or anything like that, but what I am saying is that the understanding of Gehenna, as reflected in ancient sources, can and did change. This is an undeniable fact. Now, all that history stuff aside, let's talk about how Jesus referenced Gehenna, because this is where the rubber really meets the road. Jesus mentions Gehenna 11 times. It's mentioned in Matthew 8 times, Mark 3 times in one chapter, and Luke once. And when Jesus uses the word Gehenna, Jesus isn't referencing a mythical garbage dump, but he is masterfully invoking the powerful imagery established by Gehinnom's history and Old Testament allusions in Isaiah and Jeremiah to describe the fate of the wicked upon God's final judgment. And let me tell you, it worked, because here we are 2,000 years later, still talking about it. Dang. But when you understand the history of Gehinnom and the way that ancient Jews historically and metaphorically understood it and its references, all of a sudden things make more sense. Also, when you understand who certain gospels were written for, Gehenna's usage gains more clarity. We know that Mark is the oldest of the Gospels and was written for Jewish Christians and Gentile converts. So while Gehenna is mentioned 3 times in Mark, it doesn't have the same gut punch as the book of Matthew, which was written primarily for a Jewish audience who lived in Judea. So the way Gehenna is used in Matthew is way more powerful, as those raised in Jewish culture understood the allusions and the implications of what Jesus was saying. In Luke, it's only mentioned once, and that's because Luke was written primarily for Gentile converts. And this explains why the Gospel of John doesn't mention it at all, because John was most likely written outside of Judea in Ephesus, and the idea of Gehenna just wasn't a thing to non-Jews living a 45-day walk away. And this also explains why Paul doesn't mention Gehenna, because who was Paul's audience? Gentiles living hundreds and thousands of miles away who would have no idea what Gehenna was. But make no mistake, Paul did mention the fate of evildoers, destruction, in Philippians 1 and 3, Romans 9, 2 Thessalonians 1, 1 Timothy 6, and Galatians 6. But he didn't employ the use of Gehenna because Paul was a master of connecting with those he spoke to in ways that they understood. But let's get back to Jesus. When Jesus used the term Gehenna, there's something we often miss. Go back and look at Matthew 5:22, 5:29, 5:30, Matthew 10:28, Matthew 18:9, Mark 9:43, 9:45, 9:47, and Luke 12:5. And notice how Jesus employs the use of Gehenna. It's uniquely linked to the body. Its use in Matthew and Mark describes it as a place where sinners face consequences, using vivid imagery of mutilated body parts. Mark 9:43 advises cutting off a sinful hand, stating it's better to be maimed than to go into Gehenna. Jesus extends this metaphor to feet and eyes, creating a comparison between losing a body part and the total loss represented by Gehenna, and the message is clear. Address and recognize your sin, or it will lead to your complete destruction. And he uses these references from Isaiah and Jeremiah to pull this point home for his Jewish audience. And Jesus' use of Gehenna's imagery draws from the scenes of devastation in Jeremiah's valley of slaughter and Isaiah's battle and resulting massacre. And Jesus, quoting Isaiah 66, intertwines these images of an unquenchable fire and undying worms to paint a grim picture of this complete and final destruction. And this fire is described as unquenchable or irresistible, fully consuming and reducing everything to nothing, burning up what it touches. And references there are Ezekiel 20:47-48, Amos 5:5-6, and Matthew 3:12. It's chilling imagery of the inevitability and thoroughness of God's destruction of wickedness and evil. And Luke 12:4-5 also emphasizes the body, and Matthew 10:28 highlights God's control over life and death. The concept of Gehenna, therefore, it's complex, it's culturally rich, it's a symbol of utter destruction, and Jesus evokes it powerfully into full effect. So, there are your 4 words translated as hell, and what they really meant to ancient hearers. Now, what does that mean to early Christian audiences, and how should we as modern readers and doers receive this today? Are evildoers destined to burn forever in agony, or will they simply be annihilated? Do you believe in eternal conscious torment, annihilationism, free will, or universal reconciliation? There are no easy answers there, and a lot of your beliefs depend on your faith tradition. Like I said, the series isn't about proving or disproving the existence of hell, but it is meant to provide you the historical context of what hell has meant through the ages. So, I'm curious, what do you believe about hell? I'll go through your comments and reply with a few videos with historic context to any questions that you might have. So, God bless, and I'll see you soon.